Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this very special training event this afternoon. Happy President's Day to everyone. I hope your day is going fantastic. We are here this afternoon to go over an overview of the child care minimum standards specifically for caregivers. Now, those of you that have taken my 5-day Director Credential course, this is going to look and feel a little bit different than how it normally is. Whenever we do our 5-day credentialing course, I spend a lot of time on the administrative parts of the minimum standards. This is going to be just the opposite. We're not going to talk about administrative stuff very much at all. We're going to put a lot of focus on how it pertains specifically to caregivers that are working in the classroom and what you need to know and comply with the child care minimum standards. You're going to watch this webinar today. We're going to go through this material. Once you are done with the webinar this afternoon, or if you're watching the recorded version of this, you're going to complete an assessment at the end of the training today. Once you complete that assessment on our website, at that point in time, you will get the certificate of completion. And then there is the fee that is associated with getting the training certificate. Many of you are familiar with how this works here at timthetrainer.com, but if this is your very first time doing a training with us or participating in one of our Facebook Lives, it's really simple. You just participate in the webinar, and then you do your assessment at the end, and you get your certificate. There you go. If you do have any questions or need further assistance, especially on the technical end, please give our office a call, and they'll be happy to help you out with our website and with the portal. Just a couple of really quick training tips for, again, those of you that are new to our webinar series. Make sure that you take notes so that you can discuss these standards and regulations and expectations with your leadership team at your facility. It is everybody's responsibility to know and comply with the child care minimum standards. It is not just the director of the facility or the management of the program. Every single person must know and comply with the child care minimum standards, and we have to hold each other accountable for knowing and complying with the standards and regulations. So, if there is something that is discussed in today's webinar and you're like, that doesn't feel like how we're doing it in our program, or maybe we're not meeting that expectation, or maybe we need to sharpen our skills a little bit. You want to be able to take those notes, take them back to your leadership team, have those open-ended conversations. Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Hey, we did this training with Tim on minimum standards for caregivers. I think we need to enhance this particular practice in our program. All right. We got a lot of really smart, talented people that are working in this industry. There's always a better way of doing something, all right? So we want to be humble and hungry and open to the different ways that we can meet and exceed these expectations. This particular training has been approved by the Texas Early Childhood Professional Development System. So make sure that you've got your individual TechPeds workforce ID number. Make sure that is entered on your Tim the Trainer portal on our website before you complete your assessment this afternoon. And then once you do complete your assessment and you are successful with the class, your certificate will be uploaded into your TechPeds account. You will not have to do that manually. It will go in there automatically. So that makes it super easy and convenient for both you and for your center director and your school. If you have any questions about any of the material that we're going to talk about in this training, you can message me from our website. If you go to timthetrainer.com, in the upper right hand corner, you can send a message directly through our website, or you can email or you can call with any questions that you have, or if you need more information beyond the scope of the training material, we are here for you. Message me, call me, email me, so that we can make sure that you've got the information you're needing, you've got the understanding that you're needing, or whatever it may be. Also, just a gentle reminder that per the child care minimum standards, clock hours of training must be completed in a reasonable amount of time. So the best way of looking at that is the total number of clock hours of training that you complete in a single day cannot exceed the number of hours that you worked in that day. So for example, if you worked 8 hours on a single day, you can't complete 16 clock hours of training. That's not reasonable, and childcare licensing is not going to accept those certificates. Definitely, since there's only 24 hours in a day, you can't complete like 35 hours of training in one day. That's not reasonable. It's going to create issues with childcare regulations, and it could also be a wage and hour issue for your school. All right, let's go ahead and get started with today's topic. Our learning objectives for this particular training is we're going to do a comprehensive review, and hopefully you will have a comprehensive understanding of the basic care requirements for each individual age group. Some of my favorite chapters in this book are the basic care requirements. Really does a great job of drilling down to the individual age group and kind of showing you the different expectations. Also, we're going to go over training and professional development requirements. We'll talk about that here at the beginning. And then we'll also spend some significant amount of time on health practices in the classroom. Of course, we're going to talk about so much more than these 3 particular learning objectives, but that's what we have on store for us right there. All right, so again, I just want to stress to everyone that all employees and caregivers must know and comply with the child care minimum standards. Like I mentioned, it is not just the director's responsibility, it is everybody's responsibility to make sure your school has a good compliance history. It is impossible for one person to ensure that all standards and regulations are followed and, upheld. We have to feel comfortable being able to hold each other accountable. If you are aware of someone in your program that is not complying with the child care minimum standards, it is your responsibility to report that to your center director. All right? In my opinion, if you're aware of someone who is not complying with the minimum standards and you don't report that to the center director, in my opinion, you're just as guilty as that person is. All right? And we need to create an environment where the team feels comfortable holding each other accountable. Look, I am the type of person, I definitely want and need people, to tell me when, I'm not meeting an expectation or I need to do something different. There's a lot on our plate. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to know right here. All right? So build that culture of accountability and let's do this together. And it does take every single member of your school family to know, comply, and exceed with the minimum standards. There's a couple of resources that I want to introduce you to. Sometimes people will say, they'll ask a question, where do these standards come from? Like, who makes up these standards? Well, child care regulations, they don't just sit around a table and make this stuff up. These standards and regulations come from some very respectful resources. The 2 in particular you see on the screen right here, developmentally appropriate practices in early childhood programs, published by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And I want to show you this book right here. I encourage you to get a copy of this book for your school if we have center directors that are watching this. It's an incredible resource for you. They just updated this book. and they did a really good job with the update. You can get this from naeyc.org. That website is right there on your screen. But you need to be familiar with this for sure. So a lot of the standards, especially when we talk about activities and activity plans, and when we talk about meeting the needs of the individual child, it's coming from this source right here. The other one, which again is an incredible resource for your facility and where the majority of these standards come from, is this book called Caring for Our Children, the National Health and Safety Performance Standard Guidelines for Early Care and Education Programs. And this is the 4th edition right here. You can see the website on your screen, once again, nrckids.org. And you can see this is a big book. You can actually download this book from their website. It is almost 600 pages, so it's a lot of pages to print if you're wanting to print it. I ordered this one right here off of Amazon. I want to say it was like $65. Don't quote me on that. Prices change every day. But it's a great resource for you. But again, most of these standards come from this book right here. It's the National Health and Safety Performance Standard Guidelines for Early Care and Education Programs. This, the Child Care Minimum Standards, is also made up of federal expectations under the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act, which is where our subsidy dollars come from. In order for a state to receive subsidy funding, they have to meet certain rules and expectations. And so that's what falls under the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act. So if the federal rules change, then obviously child care licensing has to update their standards to match the federal guidelines. That doesn't happen very often, but it does happen from time to time. And then if our lawmakers here in the state of Texas, if our lawmakers pass a piece of legislation that would impact the information in this book or one of the expectations, then obviously child care licensing would have to make those adjustments at that time, okay? And I'll kind of tell you as we go through some of this material, if it is something that is a standard or regulation, or if it's something that is a law, meaning that it's been written into statute, all right? And at that point, the only way it can be changed is by our legislators making an official change. All right. First thing I wanted to put in here, and we're going to go kind of in order throughout the book, but like I said, we're going to be skipping around because I'm going to bypass a lot of the administrative and clerical pieces, the record-keeping pieces, and we're going to just talk about some of the standards and regulations that are in the lap of the caregiver, all right, that the caregiver has some specific control over right here. I've got page numbers on the slides to kind of help you follow along. If you've got a current copy of the Child Care Minimum Standards, you can follow along. If you don't, it's okay because I've cut and pasted right here on the screen. Also, just keep in mind that the page numbers may be off just a little bit depending on the version of the standards that you have. I've got the most recent version that I used to create this slide deck. If you've got an older version with the amendments at the bottom right-hand corner, the page numbers may be off 1 or 2 pages. Don't get too caught up on that. Pay attention to the standard number. That's the best way of following along, is that standard number. So like on the screen right now, you're seeing 746-309. That's never going to change. All right. Page numbers may change. The standard number does not. So what you're seeing here under 309, it's going to talk about what are notification requirements when licensing finds your center deficient on anything related to safe sleep practices or abuse, neglect, and exploitation of the child. All right. So in the event that your center gets cited for any of these standards listed right here, it requires notification to all of the families enrolled in your program. So your compliance history is always going to be located for public view on the Health and Human Services website. Part of your required postings is to post your most recent monitoring visit, inspection, or investigation that you have in your program. But these 7 standards that you see listed on the screen right here require a special notification to the families. And there is a letter that you're going to receive from your local child care regulations office that's going to have to be sent out to your families. So I really want those of you that work in infant and toddler classrooms to pay really close attention to this right here, because most of these standards that you see on this page are going to be directly towards you. All right? When we talk about safe sleep practices, this is going to talk about safety requirements for your cribs, play yards, what type of furniture or equipment is prohibited in an infant room, infant sleeping in a restricted device, the position that an infant is placed to sleep in, swaddling, and then covering the child's head with a blanket. Any of these deficiencies is going to require that parent notification, and they could also come with an administrative penalty, meaning the program will have to pay a fine to child care regulations if you get cited for one of these items. Probably the biggest one that I want you to focus on is what I have highlighted on the screen, which is number 4, 2426, and it is in regards to an infant sleeping in a restrictive device. All right, an infant cannot sleep in a restrictive device unless you have a sleep exception form that has been completed by the child's health care professional and is on file at the facility. So, I can't tell you how many times I have walked into a school to visit the program, to do an assessment, to do a validation visit, or whatever it might be that I'm going in for. And I see an infant sleeping in a swing or a bouncy seat or one of those devices. And I'm like, hey, that's a deficiency right there. That child cannot be sleeping in that bouncy seat. You need to get it in the crib. And almost every single time I run into this, the response that I get from the teacher, oh, Mr. Tim, they just fell asleep. Doesn't matter. If I were a licensing inspector, you would have just been cited. And not only would you have just been cited, your center's probably going to get assessed an administrative penalty, and every single family in that program will be notified of the deficiency. So that ain't good. So what we want to focus on here, the infants must be placed in the crib before they fall asleep, not after. If they do fall asleep in the bouncy seat or in the swing, you need to get them in the crib as soon as possible. All right, so that's under the required notifications. We're going to talk, I'll point out all of these other standards that you see on this page when we get to those particular chapter. Most of them are under basic care requirements for infants, all right? But because this one comes under required notifications, we wanted to go ahead and talk about that. All right, let's talk about professional development and training requirements. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one. I'm going to just kind of touch on it a little bit. I do have a training on my website that is an overview of the professional development chapter in the Child Care Minimum Standards. If you want some really detailed information on this, you can watch that video. But just so that you will know what the expectations are, there's this chart that you're going to see in the standards, like you see on the screen right here. And they've done a very good job with this chart and letting you know that each one of these items is an individual expectation. You can't lump all this stuff together. You got to separate it out and see it as individual expectations. A lot of people make this mistake right here. All right. And when you look at training and professional development, it's not about just getting your hours. It's not about just trying to stay in compliance with the minimum standards. You're just trying to check a box, Y'all, that's not what it's all about. It's about learning. It's about growing. It's about becoming better, enhancing your classroom, enhancing your skill set. That's what it's all about. So I know for me, as a trainer and as a coach, it is a trigger when someone calls or when they come to one of my workshops and they're like, I'm just here to get my hours. And I'm like, well, do you want to learn something? Do you want to grow professionally? Nah, I just need my hours. That's not what it's supposed to be like. All right. So the first expectation that we have here is orientation to your program. And every single new employee must attend orientation. And it has to be done within the first 7 days of employment. And you cannot be left alone in a classroom. You must not have unsupervised access to the children until you complete orientation. And the topics that are included in orientation are very specific to your individual program. So for example, when they talk about food allergies, building premises, handling, storing, and disposing of hazardous waste, all right, the location and use of fire extinguishers, that's going to be very specific to your individual program. Okay, so while I do have topics on my website that cover orientation, you got to fill in the blanks here, all right? Because I don't know where your fire extinguishers are located. I don't know what your operational policies are. I don't know your policy on discipline and guidance. I definitely don't know which children in your program have food allergies. I don't know your building premises. Y'all get the point? The topics that are in orientation are very specific to your school. Then we go down to your 24 hours of pre-service. 24 hours of pre-service is for new employees that do not have at least 2 years of experience working in a licensed or registered home. Okay, and this is exclusive of annual training. So this is a completely different expectation. Don't get the two confused. It does say that if you completed pre-service at another location and you've got documentation showing that you completed pre-service at another location and you can provide that, then you don't have to do it again. You're also going to see where it says that you can complete 8 hours of pre-service before counted in child staff ratio, and then the additional 16 hours within the first 90 days of employment. While I agree that is helpful, I don't recommend it. Just get all 24 hours done up front, and then you don't have to worry about the 90-day mark. All right? So that is pretty critical right there. It goes on, the third expectation is your pediatric first aid with rescue breathing. You're going to see here that this has to be done within the first 90 days of employment, and it must be done before you are left alone in a classroom. So you cannot have unsupervised access to children until you receive your pediatric first aid with rescue breathing. This can be done through self-instructional material. So if you do it online, if you do it with a module, whatever works best for your program, just know that it has to be done within the first 90 days and it has to be done before you're left alone in a classroom. We do offer this course on my website, timthetrainer.com, so you can go ahead and get that pediatric first aid with rescue breathing so that you can get into that classroom. Number 4 is going to be your pediatric CPR. Now, pediatric CPR is different than pediatric first aid with rescue breathing, okay? Pediatric CPR must be done instructor-led, okay? You cannot do CPR online. It has to be done instructor-led. You have to be able to practice the skills portion of CPR. And you can't practice compressions, You can't practice, breathing on a computer screen. All right, so that has to be done instructor-led in person. The other difference here is that you can see that pediatric CPR has to be completed within the first 90 days of employment. Okay, so you can be placed in a classroom, you can be left alone with the children, you just have to get that CPR done within the first 90 days. So that's a little bit different than first aid. All right. You're also going to notice here that both pediatric first aid and pediatric CPR, okay, you have to stay current. All right, so you want to have some good tracking on when does your first aid and your CPR expire, and be proactive to that. If you let your CPR expire, okay, on the day that it expires is your last day of work. All right, because if you continue to work, then your school's going to be out of compliance. So you got to stay proactive to this right here. And then we go on to our 24 hours of annual training. 24 hours for caregivers, 30 clock hours of training for the director. And annual training must be completed within 12 months of the date of employment and each 12 months after. So let's talk a little bit about what needs to be included in your annual training. Oh, let me back up to this right here. The number 7 and number 8 on the training requirements. If you are involved in transportation of children, or if you're the director of the program that transports children, then you do have to get the 2 hours of transportation safety training each year. Once again, I just updated this on our website, so we have a brand new version available to you. And then the newest expectation is water safety training. So if you're taking children swimming, either at your facility or away from your facility, those of you that are involved with the responsibility of taking children to a swimming pool, you now have to complete water safety training. Also, we have that located on our website, ready to go, so you can take a look at that. All right, now here is the annual training expectations. And there's a couple of things that I have highlighted here because they are some of the most commonly cited items in this book. The first thing you want to look at with annual training is that your annual training must be relevant to the age of the children that you are providing care for. So for example, if you're an infant, let's say for example, you're a pre-K teacher, all right? And you go to a training on infant toddler brain development. You would not be able to count those hours towards annual training because the infant toddler brain development is not relevant to the age of the children that you're working with. All right? So when you're making provisions for training, when you're selecting the training, you need to be very specific that the training you're receiving is relevant to that age group that you're assigned with. Now, there's a couple of different ways around this. One thing that I always recommend when you're creating job descriptions is that somewhere in that job description it needs to say, even though you're a pre-K teacher, all right, you might say something like, all employees are cross-trained to support other classrooms when needed, which is the truth. Right? From time to time, we have to step into other classrooms and sub or cover that classroom, and that's part of the job responsibilities. Make sure that's in the job description or job responsibility list, and then you can count those hours. Those of you that are floaters, those of you that work in multiple different age groups, just make sure that that is outlined in the job description, then those training hours will count. The other big one right here is B as in boy. It says at least 6 clock hours of your annual training must be in one or more of the following topics: child growth and development, guidance and discipline, age-appropriate curriculum, and teacher-child interaction. So you need to make sure that every year, at least 6 of your 24 hours are in one or more of those 4 topics. And y'all, this kind of blows my mind that this is one of the top 5 deficiencies in the book. And I'm like, really? Because you would think that the majority of your training hours would be in one or more of these 4 topics, right? That's what I would think, but apparently that's not happening. And there's a lot of people getting cited for this. So make sure that you're meeting that criteria as well. At least 1 hour of your annual training each year must be in child abuse and neglect, okay? Focusing on the prevention, recognition, and reporting requirements for child abuse and neglect. Make sure you've got that. I did update this training on my website last year. So if you haven't watched the most revised version of my Recognizing and Preventing Child Abuse and Neglect, I encourage you to take a look at that. I shifted the focus with this year's training. Instead of focusing on recognizing and preventing child abuse and neglect at home, I put the focus on the classroom, because right now, children are more likely to be abused in our very own classrooms than they are at home. And we see this in the media just over and over and over again, all right? So working in the classroom, we have to maintain composure. We have to demonstrate competency, good judgment, self-control, so that that child is not abused in your classroom. All right? So we've got to take responsibility for ourselves right here. If you are working with children younger than 24 months of age, then at least 1 hour of your annual training must be in recognizing and preventing shaken baby syndrome and abusive head trauma, along with understanding and using safe sleep practices and preventing sudden infant death syndrome, followed by understanding early childhood brain development. And another little catch that you want to pay attention to right here is if you are a caregiver providing care for children younger than 24 months of age. So you can't just say SIDS and shaken baby syndrome is only for the infant teachers, all right? Because children younger than 24 months includes toddlers and infants. Now again, if you're working in multiple different classrooms, or if you're having to step into an infant toddler room to cover a lunch break or to help support, right? You're going to need to have this training before you do that. The way I've always done it in my schools is we require everybody to do this particular training. All right. So that way I don't have to worry about who has SIDS and shaken baby, who doesn't. And no matter what age group you work in, these are beneficial trainings for everyone. You know, recognizing and preventing shaken baby syndrome, that whole training is about composure. It's about self-regulation. It's about having good judgment and maintaining self-control. Everybody can benefit from that. Preventing sudden infant death syndrome. That training is really about awareness, right? Not just verbal communication, but non-verbal communication of the children, and being attuned and being aware of what's happening in your classroom at all times. Again, everybody can benefit from that particular training. Moving on, and this is another expectation that a lot of people get confused on. It says, while there are no hour requirements for the topics in this subsection, your annual training must include, all right, emergency preparedness, preventing and controlling the spread of diseases, including immunizations, administering medication, preventing and responding to food allergies, building premises, handling, storing, and disposing of hazardous waste. So basically what they're saying here is there's no particular hour requirement for these 6 topics. It's basically how long is it going to take for you to cover these topics. That has to be done every year. Okay, so if you want to spend an hour on each one of these topics, that'll work. If it takes you more time, if it takes you less time, As long as these 6 topics are done each year, that's what matters. The other thing that you want to make note of, and this is what I have in the highlighted box, something that is different about these 6 topics that is different from the rest of your annual training requirements. These topics are very specific to your individual location. All right? Just like in orientation, they're very specific. So even if you are using a standardized training, kind of like what I have on my website, that's fine. But you've got to be able to fill in the blanks with what is specific to your location. It's going to go on and list out remaining training hours can be in one or more of the following topics. You can see care for children with special needs. I just did a training this morning on that right there. So if you missed this morning's training, please go back to our website and watch it. I thought it was a really, really good session. Number 7, you're going to talk about anything related to professional development. And number 8, topics relevant to the age group that you're working with. That kind of makes it a wide open ball game right there. Number 12 is going to talk about minimum standards and how they apply to caregivers. That's what we're doing right now. So that's where this is going to fall into the expectations. So just make sure you're taking a look at this list again when you're making those provisions. At least 5 of your 24 hours of annual training must come from instructor-led training. Instructor-led doesn't necessarily have to be in person or live. When you go back and you look at terms and definitions, what makes something instructor-led is there an opportunity for the participant to interact with the instructor, to ask questions and get more information beyond the scope of the training material in a timely manner. That's what makes it instructor-led. When you look at that definition, there's nothing that says it has to be in person. There's nothing that says that it has to be live. Okay? There needs to be an assessment with right or wrong answers that is completed, and a certificate of completion has to be given by the facilitator. All right? But as long as there's that opportunity for you to ask questions or for you to get information beyond the scope of the material, that's what makes it instructor-led. Self-instructional training is training that people do at their own pace. Once again, there is an assessment or a quiz with right or wrong answers, and a certificate of completion is provided by the trainer. All right? But a lot of times we get questions in our office about in-person training or face-to-face training. Y'all, child care regulations does not have definitions for those. The definitions that they recognize is instructor-led and self-instructional, and there is a third one called self-study. We don't really like to talk about that one, but that's if you like read a book and you give yourself a certificate, that's self-study. There's no question or answer, there's no assessment, there's no certificate of completion. That's when it's self-study. That is limited to 3 hours per year. The other thing you want to look at with H as in Henry, the 24 clock hours of annual training are exclusive of any requirement for orientation, pre-service training, pediatric first aid, pediatric CPR, transportation safety training, and water safety training. So those are all completely different requirements. Don't get that confused and lump them together. All right. Yes. And if y'all have any questions, again, about the difference between instructor-led and self-instructional, give me a call or shoot me an email. This is kind of a big topic right now, and especially with interpretation between individual inspectors and then also with Texas Rising Star. And Texas Rising Star's definitions are no different than child care regulations when they define, you know, what is the difference between instructor-led and self-instructional. So, you know, if y'all run into any of that, just give me a shout. Now, I will be the very first person to admit in-person, face-to-face training is always the best. Okay, hands down, no debate, always the best. But while I recognize that, I also have to recognize the world that we live in these days. You know, doing a training like we're doing today on the computer is convenient. You don't have to travel. It's a lot easier to take care of your family, to take care of your school. I also know that, you know, the state of Texas is so big. There are certain parts of the state that just don't have high quality in-person training opportunities. I get it. I understand it. We try to accommodate that. All right. But when you can do something in person, live, face to face, always the best training opportunity for you right there. Okay. But, you know, sometimes we got to do what we've got to do. All right. Let's go now over to the general responsibilities of child care personnel. And I love these pages. I tell people all the time that I think these are the most important pages in the book. I have a training on my website that I just recorded a couple of months ago on the general responsibilities of personnel. Please take a look at that training. It's such important information, but I really dig deep into these standards right there. But just kind of look at this. Number one, all child care center employees, including those not counted in child staff ratio, must demonstrate competency, good judgment, and self-control in the presence of children and when performing assigned responsibilities. And I think the last part of that sentence is huge. All right? While performing their assigned duties. We've got to have that good judgment. We have to be in a healthy state of mind. We have to keep ourselves in control. And this takes practice, you know, and recognizing that we're all human. And there are going to be moments in every single day where the world is not going our way and when we get triggered. And every single one of us, there are going to be moments in every single day when we are not in a mental state to make a good decision. Now, what we've got to practice here is being consciously aware of that. Okay? It's being able to say, I am triggered. The world is not going my way. I should not be making any decisions right now. All right? Or I should not be handling this situation. That's what we've got to work towards. All right? Now, the more you work towards this, you're going to find that those moments are decreasing and you're not having as many of those moments. But I mentioned earlier, you know, with child abuse, children are more likely to be abused in our very own classrooms right now than they are at home, because we are working with so many people, both adults and children, where their window of tolerance is so narrow and what they can handle before they go into fight or flight mode is so narrow. So we've got to work on opening that window of tolerance, okay? And being consciously aware of where our mental state is at. Number 2 is going to talk about relate to children with courtesy, respect, acceptance, and patience, and understanding that, you know, the courtesy, the respect, the acceptance, and the patience that we give our children, for some of our kids, it's the only time they get it, is when they're in our classroom. And even the adults that we work with, you know, treating each other with courtesy, respect, and acceptance and patience is so critical. We've got research that tells us the way adults treat each other has a bigger impact on the child's development than how the adult treats the child. Okay? Because my state dictates the state of the child. And if adults are not treating each other with courtesy, respect, acceptance, and patience, then that's what we're downloading to the children. Okay, so yeah. Christy says, I think we need more training on cruise ships. She says in the comment section. I agree. Yeah, let's do that. Check out our training cruises, y'all. If you haven't experienced this, about 3 times a year we do trainings on cruise ships. They're a whole lot of fun. Next year we're going to start doing things a little bit different. We're still going to be doing some trainings on cruises, but we're got some very special announcement that's going to be made later on this year for some other in-person training opportunities that are equivalent to cruise ships but not on a cruise ship. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for that plug there, Christy. Recognize and respect the uniqueness and the potential of all children, their families, and their cultures. Wow. Do we not need this right now, right? So what an incredible opportunity we have every single day that we're in a classroom to teach the children that everyone is equal, that no one is better than anyone else. And even though we look different and we sound different and we come from different places, y'all, we all have something to offer each other. And what an opportunity to be able to practice this right here in the classroom. That's some cool stuff right there. Ensure that children are not abused, neglected, or exploited while in the care of the center. Do y'all see that, number 4? While in the care of the center. Okay? And then make sure we are reporting suspected abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Again, if you want to go back and rewatch my video, or if you haven't watched the new one on recognizing and preventing child abuse and neglect, I strongly recommend that one. To give you more information with that particular expectation. Other responsibilities that caregivers have, know and comply with the minimum standards. That's what we're doing today. We're kind of going through this comprehensive review so that you can know and comply. Supervise children at all times. Now, does it say right there you must supervise children most of the time? No. Does it say you must supervise children some of the time? No. At all times. All right. And remember supervision, sight, sound, awareness, positioning, proximity, energy. Those are the 6 characteristics of supervision. Again, if you need more help on this, I have a training on my website, Safety and Supervision Techniques. I just re-recorded that video a couple of months ago. Check it out. We go into quite a bit of detail on safety and supervision techniques. You must be free from duties that are not directly involving the teaching, care, and supervision of children, such as administrative and clerical duties. That includes answering a telephone that is an outside line outside of your school. All right. So if you got a communication device and you're communicating between classrooms, you're communicating with the front office, that's okay. But if you're answering a phone that is an outside line coming in, all right, the moment you pick up that phone, you're no longer counted in child staff ratio. Okay, because that's an administrative and clerical duty. That includes parents calling and wanting to talk to their child's teacher. If a parent calls and wants to talk to their child's teacher, that teacher needs to be relieved of their duties, relieved of ratio expectations while they're on the phone with that parent. Okay? Meal preparation. So if you're a cook, you can't prepare food for the entire school while supervising a group of children. Janitorial duties. Now, with janitorial duties, if you are cleaning up after lunch or snack, if you're cleaning up after a messy art project, if you're cleaning up after a child vomits on the floor, if it is directly related to the health and safety of the children, and if it's something that must be done immediately, that is not a janitorial duty. The way I kind of like to define this is that if it's something that can wait till the end of the day, that's a janitorial duty. But something that must be done immediately for the health and safety of the children, that is not a janitorial duty. And you can get clarification on this in the terms and definitions at the front of the book. And D as in dog is the big one right here. Everyone take a deep breath. Personal use of electronic devices such as cell phones, MP3 players, tablets, and video games cannot be done when counted in child staff ratio and given the responsibility of a group of children. The big thing is the personal use of electronic devices. If you have a tablet in your classroom that you're using for parent communication, if you're using a tablet for anecdotal records or developmental milestones, then that would be okay unless you using that tablet is taking your attention away from supervision and away from the health and safety of the children. And this is becoming a really big issue in our industry. The parent communication apps are starting to cause a lot of problems because our teachers are more focused on updating those apps and sending messages to the parents than they are supervising and keeping the children safe. So I'm starting to see more and more facilities that are pulling the tablets out of the classroom because we're having too many supervision related issues because the focus is not being prioritized, all right? And we're putting too much attention on those tablets and not enough attention on the safety and supervision of the children. Moving on, we've got to make sure that we're providing care that is consistent with the child's habits, interests, strengths, and any special needs. So this is where you're going to have to really focus on the individual child, and you're going to have to adapt your interaction and your engagement to each individual child, and you got to get to know them. When we talk about care is consistent with their habits, their interests, and their strengths, you got to reach them before you can teach them, all right? If you're in a registered home situation, then, you know, if there's another adult that is available to either take these phone calls or to take over the responsibility of the group of children, yes, that is best case scenario, so that you can maintain the health and safety of the children and the supervision of the children. Otherwise, if every adult is counted in child staff ratio and every adult is needed to maintain that, you know, I would have some conversations with parents that their communication needs to take place, you know, at drop off and pick up time, and have that open and honest communication with the family that every single time they call, they're taking your attention away from the children, all right? And if you have families that are calling multiple times throughout the day, and every single time they call, that's placing the children at risk, then, you know, that family may need to find other care, all right? Maybe they need a nanny. They need a one-on-one situation. But they've got to be able to understand that you're not only responsible for their child, but you're responsible for an entire group of children. And you have to make decisions that are in the best interest of everyone, okay? And so it sounds like just one of those conversations need to take place. Make sure you're interacting with children in a positive manner. And when we talk about positive manner, it's not just the words coming out of your mouth, but it's your nonverbal communication too. So your facial expressions, your tone, your body language, all right? We've got to be consciously aware of those types of interactions. Set appropriate behavioral expectations based on the child's current stage of development, all right? So once again, focusing on the individual child. Where is that child at chronologically, developmentally, mentally and emotionally? And you set those expectations based on where that individual child is at, okay? I actually love it that they added number 6. I think that was one of the best additions to this book in a long time. All right, foster those developmentally appropriate activities. We want that cooperative atmosphere instead of a competitive atmosphere. Okay, we want the encouragement, show appreciation for their efforts and accomplishments, and then make sure that everyone is communicating with each other in a nice, discreet way. When you're communicating with your coworkers or you're communicating with the director or whatever, you need to remember that everything you say out loud, there are little bitty ears listening to everything you say. So while communication is very important, it also has to be done in a way that you're not harming or shaming or belittling the children. Okay, so be careful with that. When we talk about supervision of the children, you got to make sure you know which children you're responsible for. Okay, how many children are you responsible for? Have access to their name and their ages. Provide a level of supervision to ensure the safety and well-being of the children, including physical proximity, all right, auditory and visual awareness, and the ongoing activities of the individual children. And I want y'all to really look at the proximity right here. Depending on what age of children you're working with, you're going to need to get to that child quickly to intervene when there is a safety risk, all right, when there is a behavior. So where you position yourself in the classroom is really critical. And you're going to kind of need to know where children have some struggles in the classroom, which group of children have struggles, and you position yourself in those particular areas, all right? So we got to stay on top of that. Number 5 is going to tell you you have to be able to intervene when necessary, which means you've got to be mobile, all right? If you're sitting down on the floor, crisscross applesauce, and you're in a toddler classroom, and on the other side of that toddler room, you've got a child that is about to bite, you've got to be able to get up and move, all right? So mobility is critical, all right? And I know that we've got to stay in compliance with the Americans with Disability Act. Completely understand that we've got to make accommodations based on people's, individual care needs. But when we're talking about the health and safety of children, mobility and your willingness and ability to get across that classroom to intervene is critical. Okay, so keep that in mind right there. When deciding how closely to supervise children, keep in mind their chronological age, their current stage of development, their individual differences and abilities, circumstances, hazards, and risks. And in number 6, once again, I love the child's physical, mental, and emotional and social needs. So again, really focusing on that individual child right there. And how can you meet the needs of that individual child? Great. And that is the general responsibilities of caregivers and employees. Again, I've got an entire training on my website that just focuses on that particular chapter. If you want more meat and bread, you can kind of go back and watch that one right there. Now we'll kind of move on into child-staff ratios. And y'all see that date that's up on the screen right there where it says September 2003? Every standard in this book has a date next to it. And that date is going to tell you either when that standard was adopted or the last time that standard was updated. So if you ever want to know what was recently updated or what was recently added to the book, you can just go through there and find December 2025. That was the last time we had an update. Or 24, sorry. I jumped ahead a year, didn't I? December 2024. But you can see right here, our child staff ratios in Texas, y'all, they are 22 years old. 22 years old. So when we talk about them being a little outdated, yeah, I would agree. But just know that child staff ratios are not the only thing that's going to keep children safe. It is definitely a contributing factor, but there's a lot of other stuff that has to be in place to keep our children safe, all right, and to keep us in compliance. These are the minimum standards that have to be met. If your facility is able to exceed and have lower child staff ratios, then good for you. If you're part of Texas Rising Star, if you're a nationally accredited program, you're going to be running lower child staff ratios, fantastic. But sometimes, especially with us still navigating this workforce crisis, sometimes when you've got things going on, being able to default to state ratios, it's a nice luxury to have. But if you can exceed, that's best case scenario. There are 7 different times that ratios change, and I have those listed in the yellow box right here. You can dig deeper into each of those if you look in the minimum standards, but we're just going to mention what they are. Nap time, so when children are down for a nap. For children 18 months and up, you can have twice the number of children per caregiver during that time. And the key thing right there is it's children 18 months and up. All right. Opening and closing the facility. So the first 45 minutes of the day, the last 45 minutes of the day. For children 18 months and up, you can run a 1:16 ratio during those times. If you're transporting children under the age of 2, you must have an additional adult on the vehicle in addition to the driver. I don't know a lot of people that transport children under the age of 2, but if you are doing that, you got to have that extra adult in that case. If you have a special permit to have ill children in your school, that's called a Get Well Care program, and you do have to have a special permit to be able to do this. Then you do have a lower ratio at that point. Taking children on field trips, meaning that you're leaving your premises, there's lower ratios, and those are outlined in the minimum standards. Water activities, and that is a body of water that is less than 18 inches. Sorry, they just changed that. That would require a lower child staff ratio. And it's only if there is a body of water that is 18 inches or less. If you're just doing sprinkler play or you have a splash pad and there's no body of water, then you would just follow the normal child staff ratios. But if you do have a wading pool or like one of those plastic swimming pools you get from the department store, that would be a body of water. It's going to change your ratio. And swimming is defined as a body of water greater than 18 inches. Those have different ratios for you too. You can combine groups of children for a limited amount of time. For children 18 months and up, if you're outside on the playground, during nap time, during meal times, those of you that might be faith-based and you're going to chapel, all right, you can do that. You do have to continue to maintain the child staff ratio, which you're going to use the average age of the group to determine that. When you're combining groups and you do have a child that is under 18 months of age, you cannot have more than an 18-month difference between the youngest and the oldest child in the group. But that 18-month variance rule only applies when there is a child in the group younger than 18 months. If you don't have anyone younger than 18 months, then you don't have a variance rule, all right? So, for example, an after-school program. You could have a kindergarten-age child with a 4th grader, all right? There's definitely more than an 18-month difference between the youngest and oldest child in the group, and that's okay because there's nobody in that group younger than 18 months of age, okay? So kind of keep that in mind. All right, let's talk about activities and activity plans. This chapter's got a lot in it, all right? There's a lot of expectations here, And some of them, I'm not going to lie, are a little confusing, okay? So we'll kind of make this really, I'll try to make it as simple as possible for you. But it's going to talk about what must caregivers consider when providing planned activities for the children. You've got to make sure that you're meeting the individual needs and developmental needs of each children. You're going to see here what are the responsibilities when planning activities for a child with a special care need. All right. I just did a training on this morning, so you can kind of go back and watch that one, supporting children with special care needs. And we kind of go into this in detail, but I'll just kind of show you right here that you must provide a child with special care needs with accommodations that are recommended by the healthcare professional or a qualified professional affiliated with a local school district or an early childhood intervention program. Those are the two individuals that make recommendations for accommodations. It's not the parent, not the guardian. Has to come from a healthcare professional or a qualified professional. Okay? Make sure that you're accommodating any adaptive equipment if needed. All right? Make sure that they're receiving their intervention services. All right? And then make sure that you're ensure that activities integrate children with and without special needs together. We want everyone to be treated equally right here. On your written activity plan, and when we talk about a written activity plan, you could call it a lesson plan, a daily schedule, a calendar, potato, whatever you want to call it is what you call it. Child care licensing is going to call it an activity plan. So here's what needs to be on your activity plan. Okay, you do have to develop a written activity plan. Okay. Caregivers are responsible for following your activity plan. Okay, so this could be a big deficiency right here. I just did a training a couple of weeks ago on staff supervision, and I talked in that particular training about, when the director's walking around the school and going in and out of the classrooms, before you step foot in that classroom, you look on the daily schedule. If it's 10:30 a.m., all right, according to that lesson plan or that activity plan, what should be happening on Monday at 10:30 a.m.? And when you go in the classroom, you need to make sure that that lesson plan is being followed. All right, but if licensing comes in and if they see that on your activity plan at 10:30 on Monday, you should be in circle time, and they walk in and that's not what's happening, you could be cited for that. Now, always put on your activity plan that it is contingent on the children and may change at any time, because that's reality. All right? But you need to follow that activity plan as closely as possible. And lesson plans and activity plans are not meant to be a burden. They are meant to be helpful. Okay, so use them as a tool. All right, use them as a tool. And you need to make sure that you're planning activities that all of the children can participate in regardless of their special care need. Make sure that you identify the group that the activity plan is designed for and the dates that it's designed for, whether it's a daily, weekly, or monthly activity plan, that needs to be included. One of the most common deficiencies here is that you have an outdated activity plan posted outside of your classroom. Make sure you've got a good process in place for making sure that these stay current. All right? Make sure you're allowing a sufficient amount of time for activities and routines so that children can progress at their own developmental rate. And you don't want to have a lot of waiting periods between activities where children are not engaged. All right, this kind of flushes predictability right down the toilet, and it causes a lot of problems. Again, I just did a training. I just redid a training a couple of weeks ago on successful transitions in the classroom. I talk in that particular training about avoiding those long wait times, keeping the children engaged, planning transitions in advance, right? So that you're not doing something off the top of your head, okay? So you got to stay on top of that right there. Here is where I see, people get confused sometimes. All right, so let's kind of focus on this one because this is where confusion comes in. When we talk about what must be included on your activity plan, you must have a minimum of 2 daily opportunities for outdoor play when weather permits, where children can use both small and large muscles. Now you get to define what is weather permits in your policy manual, and it's going to be different for everybody. It has to do with what climate your children are used to, how much shade do you have on your playground or lack of shade. There's a lot of different things that you got to look at right here. But once you do determine what is weather permitting, 2 daily opportunities, all right? And you can see right here, an infant, birth through 12 months, okay? They need to be provided with outdoor play for the amount of time that can be tolerated by the infant. But it is incredibly important that those infants are taken outside daily when weather permits. For children 13 months through 17 months, a toddler or a pre-kindergarten age child, they must have a minimum of 60 minutes of daily outdoor play. Okay, if you want to do 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes in the afternoon, that'll work. If you're a part-time program, so if you're not open full day and you're a part-time program, this time can be prorated, okay? And it is listed in the standards about that. And then I'm going to refer you to your local licensing inspector to help figure out what that prorated amount is. Number 2 is where it talks about a balance of active and quiet play that incorporates group and individual activities, both indoors and outdoors, and it must include a minimum of 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous active play for toddlers and a minimum of 90 minutes for moderate to vigorous active play for pre-kindergarten age children. So when you look at that, number 1 and number 2, okay, you must have for pre-kindergarten age children, you must have a minimum of 90 minutes of moderate to vigorous active play, both indoors and outdoors. All right? You have 60 minutes of outdoor play, okay, where the children are using both large and small muscles, and they've got moderate to vigorous active play. So if y'all notice, 60 minutes outside, but 90 minutes is what's required. So that means you're going to have to plan on your activity plan for your pre-kindergarten age children another 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous active play indoors, in addition to the 60 minutes of outdoor time. All right, this is where people get a little bit confused. And remember, a pre-kindergarten age child is defined as 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds that have not started public school yet. All right, so make sure you're planning that. And I have that in the little yellow box right there. It's going to go on to talk about your child-initiated activities. So we want to give choices. You can go play in the block center where you can build roads and bridges, or you can go to the art center and paint with feathers. What works best with you? That would be an example of a child-initiated activity. Caregiver-initiated activities, regular meal and snack times, and then of course your supervised nap times right there. Here's where it's going to talk about screen time. So screen time is defined as any time a child is looking at a screen. So that could be a phone, it could be a tablet, it could be a TV, it could be a computer, it could be a video game. If it's got a screen, It's a screen time, all right? It's the clearest way of defining that right there. Children under the age of 2 are prohibited from having screen time. So no screens for those infants, toddlers, anyone under the age of 2. You can use screen time to supplement, but not to replace an activity for children over the age of 2. If you are using screen time, it has to be related to the planned activity and meet educational goals. Has to be age appropriate. It cannot exceed 1 hour a day. Can't be used during mealtime, snack time, nap time, or rest times. I should have highlighted number 4 because that's a big deficiency right there. Cannot include advertising or violence, and it must be turned off when not in use. All right. So one of the most commonly cited items in the state right now is TVs or tablets being used during mealtime, snack time, and nap or rest times. Okay, so that is a deficiency right there. And in school-age children, if a school-age child is using a tablet for homework, that is not considered screen time. All right, so they've been very clear on that one right there. All right. The basic care requirements for each of the age groups. Now, these are some big chapters. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go over every detail of the basic care requirements. You can kind of look at these in the chapter. I do have videos on my website that go through each of the individual basic care requirements for the age groups. I'm actually in the process of updating these at this time. But the big stuff is what I wanted to cover with you. And most of it is on infants, okay? But you're going to see right here under the basic care requirements for infants, and you're going to see this again for toddlers. Care by the same caregiver on a regular basis. That is so important. We know that those meaningful connections, those relationships, having a secure, healthy attachment figure is so critical for the children's development. They've got to have that consistency. So care by the same caregiver on a regular basis is one of the most important things that we can do. So if you're in a situation where you're having a lot of turnover of staff and you've got different teachers in that classroom, throughout the week, you could be cited for that. All right. Now, those of you that are the teachers in the classroom, you got to come to work. Okay. When you make a commitment to, your school, when you make that commitment to your children, you got to stick to that commitment because they need care by the same caregiver on a regular basis. It's so important to their secure attachment system. All right. If you want to learn more about the attachment system, I do have a video on my website that's called Understanding the Attachment System. It's really powerful. I encourage y'all to check that one out. Okay. Again, giving individual attention to your infants, holding them and comforting them when they're upset, giving prompt attention to their physical needs, making sure that they're getting adequate feeding, their diapers are changed. Make sure that you don't have choking hazards in the classroom, and never leaving infants unsupervised. Even if they are in a crib asleep, you cannot leave them unsupervised. This is going to talk about how your room must be arranged in an infant room. Y'all can kind of read this one on your own, but what I want y'all to look at is number 4 and 5. Your cribs must be far enough apart so that one infant may not reach into another crib. And then I get this question all the time. How far apart must my cribs, mats, or cots be from each other? And I've heard all these crazy answers out there. Well, let's look and see what's exactly in the book. All right. How far apart must your cribs, cots, and mats be? You can see number 5. provide caregivers with enough space to walk and work between cribs, cots, and mats. So if you call me up and you say, hey, Tim, how far apart must my cribs, mats, and cots be from each other? My question back to you is, how big are your teachers? All right? And I know that sounds silly, but it's the truth, because that's how you determine how far apart they have to be. There just has to be enough room for your adults to walk and work between these items. All right? So there is no actual measurement anywhere in this book. It's going to be different based on your particular situation. It's going to talk about the furniture that must be in your infant room. So adult-sized rocker or chair. Doesn't have to be a rocking chair. It can be a stationary chair. An individual crib to sleep in for each non-walking infant. Then an individual crib, cot, bed, or mat for your walking infants or non-walking infants 12 months of age and older. Make sure you've got a hand washing sink that is near your diaper changing area, and make sure that you've got a significant number of toys to be able to keep the children engaged in activities. I just redid my training on preventing and controlling the spread of illnesses. We talked in that training about having a sufficient amount of toys so that as a child, gets bodily fluid on a toy, either by sticking it in their mouth or drooling on it, you can put it in your dish pan so that it can be sanitized and disinfected, but you need to have enough toys that'll come back down, and you've got a nice rotation so that the children always have plenty to do, plenty to keep them engaged. Safety straps, whether it's a diaper changing table or a high chair or a chair that they're eating in. Kind of the basic rule right here is that if the piece of equipment was manufactured with a safety strap, then it has to be used. If it wasn't manufactured with a safety strap, then no safety strap is required. You're basically going to follow the manufacturer's recommendations for using that furniture and equipment. 2409 is going to go over crib expectations. Any crib that you use in your program must meet the Consumer Product Safety Commission crib guidelines, and they have to have a certificate of compliance. All right, and that is a record that you have to keep on file for licensing to review. 2409 is just going to go over the crib guidelines. Make sure that you're buying your furniture and equipment from an establishment that specializes in group care, so that way you know that your stuff is going to meet the expectations. 2415 is going to talk about pieces of equipment that are prohibited in an infant classroom. You can see here baby walkers, doorway jumpers, accordion style gates, choking hazards, bean bags, and water beds. Those are all prohibited. B as in boy is what I really want y'all to look at on this page, except for a tight-fitting sheet. All right? Your crib has to be bare. Nothing in the crib but the baby. All right? So there you go. Now, a common question that I get on this one, what about pacifiers? Pacifiers are not mentioned anywhere in this book. Okay, there is no regulation or standard on pacifier. So if you have a child in a crib with a pacifier, you should be fine as long as it's not a choking hazard or a strangulation issue. So if that pacifier has the strap on it that connects to their little outfit, that could be strangulation. Okay, so you don't want to have that in there. But if it's just a single pacifier, you should be fine with that. If you have any questions, I would talk to your individual local licensing inspector for their interpretation, but that is typically fine. All right. When we talk about what activities must you provide, Each one of your basic care requirements for each of the age groups is going to have this part of it. And this is really cool stuff. Make sure that you're going over what activities must be provided for each age group. Go over it at least once a year. You can use it as like a little scavenger hunt that you can go through your classroom and make sure that you've got all the appropriate equipment that is needed for that particular age group. This is good stuff right here. Now, when we talk about what activities must be provided for an infant, once again, you can see number 1, opportunities for outdoor play. So when weather permits, you need to get those infants outside as long as they can tolerate it. All right. But then when you go down to, for example, number 7, opportunities for small muscle development. Examples of age-appropriate equipment would include busy boxes, rattles, teethers, grasping toys, shaking or squeezing toys, or cloth toys. So again, right here, this is kind of giving you a list of what all toys and equipment need to be included in that classroom. It also is kind of showing you that there is a reason why we have certain toys and equipment for those particular children. So really good stuff right here. Stephanie, I see your question over in the comment. I don't know what conversation that was in regards to. Maybe it was the crib or the sleeping. If so, kind of go back to what we were talking about with a crib for children 12 months and younger that are non-walkers. Once they are walking and over the age of 12 months, then they can have a crib, cot, or mat that they can use for nap time or rest time. So I think that might have been the question you were asking about. Yes, okay, so we just answered that. All right, when we talk about feeding an infant right here, you see your expectations under 2419. Number 3, never prop or support a bottle with an object. That is a big time no-no right there. That is a high risk deficiency, and that could lead to an administrative penalty if you get cited for propping a bottle. And then number 7 is another very commonly cited item. Never allow infants to walk around with or sleep with a bottle or training cup. And where the deficiency normally comes in is in the young toddler classrooms, like your 12 to 17 month old. And when the parent drops off that child, they drop them off with a training cup, okay, or with a bottle. If that happens, we need to educate the parent that they can't do that. And we need to make sure that they're not walking around with those items. But that's where we specifically see that right there. The infant feeding instructions, you do need to get an infant feeding instruction for those infants that are not on table food, and your infant feeding instructions need to be updated every 30 days. If there has been no change to the infant feeding instruction, just have the parent sign off on that. They don't need to fill out a new form every 30 days. Just have them sign an initial or whatever at least every 30 days that there's been no change. Okay. 2424, where must an infant sleep? They must sleep in a designated crib, cot, bed, or mat. When we talked about infants must not sleep in a restrictive device, that is in the standards now, but before that was in the standards, this is where they would cite it, all right, is that the child should be sleeping in the crib, not in the bouncy seat or in the swing, all right? But now we do have specific standards addressing that. If an infant wakes up in their crib, they may remain in their crib for up to 30 minutes, before they come out. In my opinion, that's a long time. Try to get them out of there sooner than that if possible. We want to keep them engaged. We want to keep them busy. 2426 is where it's going to talk about, may I allow an infant to sleep in a restrictive device? No, you cannot let an infant sleep in a restrictive device unless you have that sleep exception form that is filled out and signed by the child's healthcare professional, stating that there is a condition and the child needs to sleep upright or sleep in a certain position. But the biggest thing is that infant sleep exception form has to be signed by the healthcare professional. Make sure you've got that on file if that is the case. Make sure you're not covering their head for your infants over 12 months of age. Make sure that they don't pull the blanket over their head. Now, if it's an infant under 12 months, they can't have a blanket in the crib, period. But we typically see this with those young toddlers. And then make sure you have a daily report that is given to the parent that has the times that the infant slept, when they consumed food, how much food did they consume, their diaper changes, the general mood of the infant for the day, and a brief summary of their activities. This can be done in written format. This can be done in digital format, whatever works best for you and your program. When we look at the basic care requirements for toddlers, very, very similar chapter right here. Once again, you're going to see care by the same caregiver on a regular basis. So again, they need that secure attachment figure in their life. That's very critical to their development of attachment. Here it's going to talk about what furniture and equipment you have for your infants and for your toddlers. Just make sure that it's age appropriate. You don't want furniture that's too big, because then you're going to create supervision issues, all right? So make sure you're using furniture and equipment that is manufactured for the toddler age group. The activities that we must provide toddlers, same thing. You can kind of go through here and treat it like a little scavenger hunt, making sure that you've got all the appropriate equipment that is needed to support toddlers' development. Really good stuff right here. Have some fun with it. Here's the rest of the list over on the next slide, 2507, the other activities that must be included for your toddlers. You do not have to share a daily report with your toddler families. However, there does need to be an opportunity for you to communicate with them, to be able to discuss any observations, any comments, any concerns regarding their child. I know a lot of programs still do daily reports in their toddler classroom. That's what I've always done. If that's what you choose to do, that's exceeding the expectations, but just know that with licensing, it is no longer required with that age group. Pre-kindergarten age children, you can go through this. Once again, it's just age appropriate for this group of children, your 3s and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds that have not started public school. All right, you're going to start seeing where it's talking about learning centers or interest centers. They need to be clearly defined. Same thing right here. You're going to see your activities that you must provide for your pre-kindergarten age children. Again, just like with the other two age groups, you can see, use this as a scavenger hunt. Do we have everything that is required and recommended? Is there a purpose or a reason why we have some of the stuff in these classrooms? Oh, look, there is a reason for this. Love these lists right here. Again, you're just getting the rest of the list. You can see that it's pretty extensive. Take this out of your minimum standards. Take a good look at it. make sure that you're meeting all these requirements. Basic care requirements for school-age children. Y'all, I love this page so much. This page makes my heart so happy. Look at the number one thing listed under the basic care requirements for school-age children. Individual attention from and conversation with adults. Y'all, that's exactly what our school-age children need. The way I look at after-school programs, they have a teacher all day long when they're at public school. They have a parent at home at nights and on the weekends. When they are in our after-school programs, they just need role models that they can look up to and that they can talk to. School-age programs should be a stress-free environment. They should be relaxed. They should be comfortable. And anytime I'm staffing an after-school program, I'm looking for exactly what I just called it. I'm looking for role models. People that these kids can just look up to and that they feel comfortable having conversations with. That's what our after-school programs are all about. So I've got some new trainings coming out that are specifically for school-age programs, so be on the lookout for that. They're coming soon. It is going to tell you when we talk about requirements for school-age programs, you do need to provide time and space for the children to do their homework. But I'm going to add to this right here. We're going to provide time and space for the children to do their homework, but we're not responsible for the outcome. Okay? It is still the parent's responsibility to check their child's homework. I can tell you a lot of crazy stories where I've had parents upset because their kid was failing the second grade and they wanted to blame it on us. Unless you're offering tutoring services, unless that is a service you provide, hey, we're going to provide time and space, but it's up to you, to be able to check their homework. We got the furniture and equipment that needs to be in your after-school program. Again, make sure that it's age appropriate. I started my career working in after-school programs, so I have a very heavy heart for after-school children. Sometimes after-school programs are treated like the redheaded stepchild. They get the leftover furniture, the leftover equipment, they get the leftover supplies, and sometimes they even get the leftover teachers. All right? And y'all, we got to stop doing that. We need to give them the attention that they deserve. Their furniture and equipment needs to be age appropriate. All right? Their teachers need to be very selected on the skills, the ability, and the training that they have. All right? We got to flip the script on that one right there. When we talk about the activities that must be provided for school-age children, here again is where it's going to mention study time for those children who choose to do their homework assignments. You might want to address this in your policy manual that, sometimes we'll have parents that'll come in and say, I need you to assign one teacher to just sit down and read with my child. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. All right. We've got lots of other children that need our attention. I can't just assign one person to do your studying and your tutoring. All right. So sometimes we have to have those conversations right there, unless that's a service that you choose to offer, might be a good one. Again, looking here at your opportunities for your activities that you must provide. It's just age appropriate for this group of children. And now let's shift over into discipline and guidance. You are responsible for having a discipline and guidance policy. Everyone must follow your discipline and guidance policy while on your premises. So all caregivers and teachers must follow the school's discipline and guidance policy, and parents must follow the discipline and guidance policy while they're on your premises. Now, what they do at home is their business, but when they're on your premises, when they're in your building, they have to follow these rules too. All right? So your discipline needs to be individualized and consistent. It must be appropriate for the level of understanding. We want to tell children what they can do, not what they can't do. All right, so lots of positive discipline techniques, praise and encouragement. All right, reminding them of the expectation. We use a lot of visuals in the schools that I work with, redirecting the children, these type of things. Now, if those of you that watched my video this morning on supporting children with special care needs, if you've watched my video on positive guidance and discipline, punishing children does not change the behavior. The only way you can get a different behavior is to teach a new skill. All right? So when you are imposing a consequence, it needs to be reasonable, related, and respectful. But we need to focus on teaching the new skill. That's how we get a different behavior. What types of discipline and guidance are prohibited in your program? You can see the list of 10 items right here. Grabbing or pulling a child, that is something that is prohibited. So we've got to maintain that self-control. We have to practice self-regulation. We have to use competency. All right? No humiliating, ridiculing, rejecting, or yelling at a child. So you've got to be careful with that tone of voice. And trust me, y'all, I'm a loud person. Everyone in my family, we're loud people. All right? When I first started working in early education, I thought I was going to get fired because my director would come back to my room and say, "Hey, Tim, we can hear you all the way up in the office, stop yelling at the kids." And I'm like, I'm not yelling at the kids. Well, I wasn't yelling at the kids, but I do have a loud voice and my voice carries, So I've really had to practice over the years controlling my voice tone and being very consciously aware of that, even though I'm having fun and we're engaging and interacting, it can very easily be perceived as yelling, okay? So watch that. Number 8, we've talked about, you cannot place a child in a restrictive device as a form of timeout. So if you're in a toddler 2-year-old classroom and you've got a biter, you can't put that biter in a high chair or in a bouncy seat and strap them in, to keep them from eating the other children. Nope, that is a violation right there. When you've got biting going on in your classroom, we want to focus on stress reduction techniques. Stressed toddlers bite, all right? So it's all about stress reduction. Nothing you do after a bite will prevent future bites, all right? So I've got a video on my website on biting. Please check it out. We kind of talk about all of this stuff. I see someone over here in the comments that y'all are just like me. You've got that loud voice. Let's not call it a loud voice. We have a traveling voice, all right? We've got that traveling voice right there. And then number 9 is something that was added to the standards about 6 years ago. You cannot withhold active play or keep a child inside as a consequence for behavior. They need that gross motor development. They need the fresh air, all right? Probably the reason why they're acting out is they're not getting enough of it, okay? So we want to get them outside, okay? It's an exciting voice, Janie says. Yes, I love it. And I think we're exciting people. So that's perfect right there. Children do need to have nap time every single day. So make sure that we're providing that opportunity for them. I just want to point out under 2903, where it talks about how long may the nap or rest time last. You're going to see right here, it says the sleep or rest period must not exceed 3 hours. But if you notice, there is no minimum amount given right here. All right. So based on the developmental needs of the child, based on the chronological age of the child, you can kind of set these perimeters right here. You can have a short rest period in the day, but as far as how long are they required to nap, there is no minimum amount listed. It just can't exceed 3 hours, which I think is long. All right. If a child is not sleeping after 1 hour, you need to give them something to do. All right. And if you don't, they're going to find something on their own to do. That's what it's going to list under 2907. After they've been awake for 1 hour, you need to make sure they have something to do right there. Okay. Once again, same thing as the conversation with cribs. All right. When we talk about how must you arrange the napping equipment, your cots and your mats, they just need to have a sufficient amount of walking space and working space for the caregivers. All right. And be arranged so that each child and caregiver has access to a walkway. All right. But as far as 12 inches, 18 inches, 24 inches apart, that's not addressed in here. Just enough space for people to walk and work. All right. We're getting close to the end here. Y'all hang in there. I know it's a lot of information. I'm trying to make minimum standards as fun as possible. Okay. But health practices. And I do have an entire video just on health practices, on preventing and controlling the spread of diseases, that you can kind of take a deep dive on my website. But I'm just going to highlight some of the important stuff right here and kind of show you where these expectations are at, okay? So when we talk about what steps must I take to ensure a healthy environment, go over this list. Whenever you're first hired, during your onboarding, at least once a year, go through this list as a group, have open-ended conversations about the steps that you take to ensure a healthy environment, and always be looking for ways to be better, okay? What processes are working, what processes are not working. Just because a technique worked last year doesn't mean it's going to work this year, okay? So we've got to be willing enough to adapt when needed, all right? So, number one, setting aside toys and equipment that are put in children's mouth or get contaminated with a bodily fluid. And again, be open-minded with this. What all types of bodily fluid could you see in a classroom on a daily basis? Obviously saliva, mucus, urine, feces, vomit, blood, sweat, right? And the list just goes on and on. The opportunity to get bodily fluid in your classroom happens every moment, okay? So we need to be aware of that. Machine wash those cloth toys at least weekly or when contaminated. And think outside of the box here. What all toys in the classroom are made of cloth? Okay. Machine wash linens at least weekly when soiled or before another child uses them. Now, weekly on linens, I think that's gross. Okay. Most programs that I work with machine wash their linens daily. Okay. But it's totally up to you. Sanitizing sleeping equipment before another child uses it or when soiled, okay? Again, most programs I work with sanitize their sleeping equipment daily. Even though the same child sleeps on the same cot every single day, I just think it's good, best practice to sanitize, every day right there. Sanitizing potty chairs after each use. Especially when children are potty training, they miss. You get a lot of bodily fluid on the potty chair. That makes sense that it needs to be sanitized after each use. But I want to expand your thinking past a potty chair and just think about your regular toilets in some of your classrooms. Even though it's not a potty chair, the kids still don't have the best aim. So probably a good recommendation that you're going in and sanitizing those toilet seats as often as possible, but especially when they visibly have bodily fluid on them. Making sure that your water tables are well maintained. If you still have sandboxes in your program, that they are well maintained. Sandboxes are starting to become a thing of the past. Kind of makes me sad because there's really cool development that happens there, but they are kind of going away. And then on garbage is inaccessible to children, doesn't attract any type of insects or rodents. And kind of the general rule of thumb with garbage cans, if anything can be placed in that garbage can that has a bodily fluid on it, it should have a lid. If no bodily fluid goes in a trash can, then technically it doesn't require a lid. My opinion on this one is pretty much anything that you throw away could have a bodily fluid on it. So I always like to recommend that you've got a lid on every trash can. Making sure that your floors, your ceiling, and your walls are in good repair. Making sure that your center is well heated, lighted, and ventilated. If you've got windows that will open when weather permits, if you can get fresh air into that classroom, that's going to help with the spread of illnesses. Now, I do have a very strict rule on this one. Windows are only opened if there is a screen. If there is no screen on that window is not opened. We don't want children going out a window, okay? So I've always had that big rule right there. Sanitizing tabletops, furniture, and other similar equipment used by children when it's soiled or when it could have a bodily fluid on it. So again, think outside of the box right here. What other similar equipment could get bodily fluid? You know, the back of a chair, when children pull out a chair, doorknobs, faucets, common areas, playground equipment. You know, really think outside of the box right here, and this is going to help you maintain a healthy environment and prevent the spread of illnesses. Making sure that your cleaning supplies are clearly marked and that they are stored out of the reach of children. 3415 is going to talk about when caregivers and employees must wash their hands. So you've got 13 different times that adults must be washing their hands. What I have highlighted here on the screen are the most commonly missed items. So number 3, after you arrive at your center, when you come to work or when you return from your lunch break, the very first thing you should do is wash your hands, okay? After your own personal toileting, your hands should be washed. Y'all know when you go to a restaurant, you know, or a fast food place, you always see the sign in the restroom that says employees must wash hands before returning to work. No different for us, all right? After eating, drinking, or smoking, and that includes your own personal lunch or meal, okay? Make sure that you're washing your hands. And you can see the other ones that are listed right there, but the 3 that I have highlighted are the most commonly missed. For children, there are 7 different times that children must wash their hands. So before eating, before playing in a water table, after toileting or having their diaper changed, after outdoor activities, after playing in the sand, after feeding or touching animals, and in any other time the caregiver has a reason to believe that the child has come into contact with something harmful. Okay? Well, for some children, that might be every waking moment. You know, you're like, Johnny, just go stand by the sink. No, I'm just kidding. But, you know, that's where, again, you want to pay really close attention to that. Make sure that when you're washing your hands with soap and water, that you're rubbing your hands with a lather for at least 20 seconds, that you're rinsing with clear water, you're drying your hands with a clean cloth or allowing it to air dry, and then you're turning off the faucet with a paper towel or a towel. All right, those are the steps for hand washing. It is going to tell you that you can use hand sanitizer in certain situations. Hand sanitizer cannot be used with children under 24 months of age. So hand sanitizer can only be used for children over 24 months of age when soap and water is not available. If soap and water is available, then soap and water must be used. All right. If the hands are visibly dirty or visibly greasy, then you have to use soap and water. All right. But if you're on the field trip, if you're outside on the playground for your children older than 24 months, then in that case, hand sanitizer can be used. The other big one that I want you to pay attention to right here is number 4. Children have adult supervision when using hand sanitizer. It's a big trend right now for children to be carrying around hand sanitizer. This is all over TikTok and memes and things like that. And school-age children especially are carrying around hand sanitizer in their pocket or in their backpack. That could lead to a deficiency, because once they arrive at your program, must have adult supervision when using hand sanitizer. Okay, so we need to be aware of that. And if you do see this stuff coming in, we need to have a conversation with that family. With your infants, when we talk about hand washing for your infants, until the child is old enough to be held up to the sink or to reach the faucet, you can wash the infant's hands with a cloth or a towelette. A baby wipe, as long as it's clearly marked on the packaging that it can be used for that purpose. You can use the baby wipe. We've always done it where we've had the spray bottles. We've had a spray bottle with soapy water, a spray bottle with rinse water, kind of lather little hands together, and then you do the rinse water, you dry it with the paper towel after each diaper change or when as needed. Now, as soon as the infant is old enough and they've got the muscle strength in the head and the neck to be held up to a sink and are able to reach the sink, then they have to have their hands washed with soap and water. You can't use the baby wipes or the towelettes at that point. All right? When we talk about wearing gloves, your training on handling, storing, and disposing of hazardous material has to meet the guidelines set forth by the Centers for Disease Control, or the CDC. And a big part of that is, when are you required to wear a glove and when are you not required to wear a glove? Basically, you have to follow universal precautions when handling when handling blood, vomit, or other bodily fluid that could contain blood. All right? And at that point in time is when you wear gloves. If you're dealing with other bodily fluids that don't contain blood, then gloves are not required. Okay? But here's my opinion on this one. Any bodily fluid could potentially have blood in it. And blood is not always visible to the eye. So a best practice for you to consider, and what I've always done in the schools that I work with, is that, anytime you handle bodily fluid, you wear gloves. Okay? And after you treat one child, you throw them away, you get another pair of gloves. All right? So 1 pair of gloves per child. That is best practice right there. If you are handling blood or vomit, all right, and it's visible that it's blood and vomit, then your gloves that are contaminated with blood or vomit need to be put in a tied, sealed, or otherwise closed plastic bag and discard it immediately. If that glove has blood or vomit on it, you can't just toss it in the regular trash can. All right? You've got to follow these universal precautions. And even though you're wearing gloves, you still have to wash your hands after handling this. We talk about diaper changing right here. Promptly change soiled and wet diapers. All right, so I know that some of you, we change diapers every 2 hours. You can check diapers every 2 hours, but as soon as that child has a soiled or wet diaper, they need to be changed. All right, otherwise you're going to deal with rashes, you're going to deal with infections, you're going to deal with some bad stuff right there. Make sure that they're clean, make sure that they're dry before you put on the new diaper. Powders, creams, and ointments, okay? You must have written permission from the parent before using powder, creams, and ointments or lotions. If a parent provides the powder, cream, ointment, or lotion, then permission is implied. I still recommend getting the written permission either way. On the equipment that is used for diaper changing, your diaper changing table or surface is smooth, non-absorbent, and easy to clean. All right. Can't be an area of the classroom that children come into close contact with, such as play areas or eating areas, dining tables, sofas, basically any of those type of areas. If you do have a diaper changing table that is above floor level, okay, then there must be a safety mechanism in place and used. The caregiver's hand must remain on the child, or the caregiver must be facing the child and be within an arm's length of the child. Now, when you look at C as in cat under 3503, number 1, 2, and 3, I recommend that you change the word or to and. All right? They're using a safety mechanism, their hand stays on the child, and they are within an arm's length. All right, it kind of scares me that that is an or and not an and. And then make sure that you've got that hand washing sink so that they can wash their hands. When we talk about how much you prevent the spread of germs when diapering a child, you can kind of read this right here. You can use those disposable gloves. Make sure that you're discarding them after each child. If the caregiver has an open wound or any injury that inhibits hand washing, such as a cast, bandage, or brace, then they must not be allowed to change diapers. So the ability to wash your hands has to be present, okay? That's pretty important right there. I got a question about twins. Clarification that each child should have their own ointment. Yes, that is a very good question. The powder, creams, and ointments must be for the individual child with the individual child's name on it. So yes, and I have seen this situation, and I have seen licensing's interpretation of this. So each one of the children need to have their own powder, cream, ointment, or lotion. Good question. If you are sanitizing a diaper changing you must sanitize the diaper changing surface after each use. However, if you are changing diapers on a number of children consecutively, you can cover the surface with a non-absorbent paper liner that is disposed of between each diaper change. And then once you're done with the cycle, then you can sanitize the liner. Another recommendation is the diaper changing table pad, the mat, having at least 2 of those, and you can rotate them. So you change a diaper, you sanitize the mat, set it aside, bring the other one out, and then that way this one is air drying while you're using this one, and then you can just flip flop them. That's another good way of doing this. I've seen that done many times. When we talk about illness exclusion, this is under 3601. Unless you are licensed to provide get well care, you must not allow an ill child to attend your center if one or more of the following exist. And look at number 1 right here. The illness prevents the child from participating comfortably in the child care center's activities, including outdoor play. Do y'all see that? It's right here in the standards in black and white. So if you have a family that comes in and they say, I don't want my child to go outside today. If they're too sick to go outside, they're too sick to be in care. All right? So, you might want to keep a copy of this page handy to be able to use it. Hey, it's not my rule, it's the state of Texas. Or if the illness results in a greater need of care than the caregiver can provide without compromising the health, safety, and supervision of the other children. We've got to remember that, you're not just there to take care of one child. You're there to take care of 15 children or however many you have in your classroom. And you've got to be able to provide safe and healthy care for everyone. If the child has one or more of the following conditions, they have to be excluded. So an oral temperature of 101, accompanied by other signs and symptoms or behavior changes, a tympanic temperature, which is the ear, an auxiliary temperature, which is the armpit, or an infrared temperature, which is the forehead, of 100 degrees, once again accompanied by other signs and symptoms of an illness or behavior changes. Okay? If there are other signs of a severe illness, such as a child being lethargic, abnormal breathing, uncontrolled diarrhea, 2 or more vomiting episodes in a 24-hour period, a rash with a fever, mouth sores, drooling, behavior changes, these all could also be exclusion from the program. Let's move over to safety precautions now. What safety precautions must you take to protect the children in your program? Make sure that your electrical outlets are inaccessible to children 5 years of age, and any group of children 5 years of age and younger must have the safety outlets or a safety cover in place. Make sure you're doing that, and those commonly come out usually by the cleaning crew. Make sure that you've got a good process in place, that those safety covers are going back on. Air conditioners, fans, and heaters are out of the reach of children. I've seen this one commonly cited with fans that are being placed in the classroom. Make sure that they're out of the reach of children. All right. Sorry, there was a comment question I think that was in the chat screen that wasn't meant for me. All right. Kind of moving on right here. When we talk about safety precautions, storage chests, boxes, trunks, anything with a hinge lid, all right, has got to be equipped so that the lid will stay open, or it's got to have ventilation holes. All right, anything that might entrap a child. Think about your home center furniture. All right, if you've got the little refrigerator or the little stove, something like that, you might want to take this into consideration. Now, once again, if you're buying your furniture and equipment from a manufacturer that specializes in early education programs, they're going to be built in compliance, but you still need to be aware of anything with the hinge lids or doors. Bodies of water are inaccessible to children, and making sure that televisions are anchored in a way that they can't tip over. All right. I don't want to end on a Debbie Downer note, but I could tell y'all some really sad stories about children who have died in licensed childcare facilities right here in Texas because TVs have fallen on top of them. I got a question. Can I elaborate on uncontrolled diarrhea? Yes. So this book right here, The Caring for Our Children, the National Health and Safety Performance Standard Guidelines for Early Care and Education Programs, they are going to define uncontrolled diarrhea as loose stool that is not contained inside the diaper. Okay? If it is leaking out of the diaper, either from the legs or out the top, that would be uncontrolled. If it can be contained in the diaper, all right, then that's a different story. But that is specifically mentioned in this book on whether or not it's contained in the diaper. Now, the other thing, since y'all asked for me to elaborate on this, I will. Also knowing that there is a difference between loose stool and diarrhea, just like there is a difference between vomit and a child spitting up. All right? We don't exclude children for loose stool or for spitting up. We exclude children for vomiting and uncontrolled diarrhea. All right? And usually the way you can tell the difference between vomit and diarrhea is the smell. All right? But from the diaper standpoint, can it be contained in the diaper? But if it's leaking out of the diaper, that's uncontrolled. Okay? So, and again, you can refer to this book. Really, really good clarification on that one. All right. Last slide that I have for this presentation. How can I ensure the safety of children from other persons? Y'all, this one is so important right here. People whose behavior and or health status that poses an immediate threat or danger to the health and safety of the children must not be present when children are in care. Okay? This is where we all have to work together as a team. You can't just rely on one or two individuals in your program to keep everyone safe. If you see something suspicious, you say something. You see something suspicious, you say something. But whether it's a parent in your program, whether it's another employee in your program, whoever it may be, but if someone's behavior has gotten to a point where it could impose an immediate threat or danger, that person has got to go. All right? So you get a disgruntled employee, you get a disgruntled parent, right? We got to be aware of this. And this is when I'm doing director trainings, we talk about this. You need to have a parent code of conduct policy. All right? If a parent has a concern or a complaint, it must be handled in a professional manner. But if a parent comes in yelling and screaming and acting crazy, all right, and they're posing a threat, they got to go. And that needs to be grounds for dismissal. We have to handle things in a professional manner. All right. But when we talk about, all of the situations we're hearing about with intruders and, active shooters and people that want to cause harm, we have to work together to follow our processes, to follow our emergency preparedness plan. If you see something suspicious, you say something. We got to work together on that. And then the last thing right here, people must not smoke any e-cigarettes, vapes, tobacco products, anywhere on the premises. So that would include the parking lot, sidewalks, playgrounds, all right, common areas. These are all part of your premises. So probably the biggest thing right now are the e-cigarettes and the vaping devices. If you're walking across the parking lot puffing on one of those things, you can be cited by licensing for that. Okay. And they've really put a focus here lately on premises and grounds, making sure that people understand that your parking lot and your sidewalk is going to fall into that category. All right. So if you're that person that you've got your vape or your e-cigarette, you do you, but you need to finish it before you get out of your car. All right. But you can't walk across the parking lot. All right. I know that we spent, a little over 2 hours, almost 2.5 hours on minimum standards for caregivers. By no means did we talk about everything that's in the book. We would be here for an entire week if we did that. But I really wanted to touch on the major stuff that is in the caregiver's lap that you've got direct control and responsibility of. Please make sure that you do a comprehensive review of the entire book so that we can hold each other accountable. But this was the big stuff right here. Again, if you have any questions about any of the material that we covered today, please reach out to me. If you need more information beyond the scope of the training material, reach out to me. You can message me on our website. You can email me. You can call me, and we can get you taken care of. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that this cleared some things up and have got you moving in the right direction. I'll post the link, or Kent will post the link now for you to complete your assessment to get your training certificate. Thank you all so much for participating in these trainings today. Thank you for everything that you do for the early education community. And just let us know if you need anything else. All right, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.